We're ready. We're back
We're
on.
ready.
Welcome back,
Yay.
everybody.
All right. So, number two of 24.
Two down. Carl, you know what the best part about ID24 this year is?
We don't have to stay up the whole time?
Exactly. We do not have to stay up the whole time.
Yeah. For those who were with us last year, Billy and I were holed up in a Residence Inn?
Something like that, yeah.
Just outside of Baltimore. And we stayed up the whole 24 hours hosting together. And, man, Bill stank up the place. That's all I'm going to say. Bill, it was all Bill. Any, sweaty stench from two dudes that were up 24 hours, that was all Bill, not me. I smell like roses.
Yes, and believe everything you ever hear on the internet.
But it was great, but it was so super duper duper stressful to get that all done right and stay awake the whole time. So there we go.
We smartened up this year. We recruited an entire team of TPG people that are going to monitor these and moderate these around the clock. Carl and I are going to be with you until midnight here on the East Coast, and then we are going to go to bed and awake tomorrow. We do have our own hangout tomorrow, but you know what? This isn't about us, Carl. This is about style and substance with our next presenter.
Two things that neither of us have.
I have substance.
I don't have style, as you can
I know that. I can see. But
so this.
Hi, Amelia. How are you?
I'm fine.
All right. Another Canadian. I like this. I like the odds are in my favor here. We can tease Carl relentlessly about his future president. Who, by the way, YouTube has selected as the picture for Molly's talk. If you go to YouTube and look up Molly's talk, you'll actually see a picture of Donald Trump's screaming face.
Great.
But hey, how about we stop wasting Amelia's time and we let her jump in and start presenting?
All right. Off to you.
Okay. So one of you is giving me a feedback echo, though, so if you could figure out who that is and mute it, that would be appreciated. So my name is Amelia Bellamy-Royds. I am mostly known past few years for working on SVG, Scalable Vector Graphics. There will be very, very little SVG in this talk. Instead, I'm just talking generally about visual communication in the broader sense and how visual designers can help build semantics even for blind users or visually impaired users of varying degrees by trading the information that you're encoding in a visual design into the meaningful semantics that help assistive technology tools. So I should warn you, I'm not a visual designer, and so these are not the prettiest slides, and they're rather full of text. And if you want to follow along at home, there is a link that I've tweeted out with the URL to just follow along with the HTML. But, so a whole lot of talk up there, probably not too information. Get off talking. Everybody knows that bad design is an accessibility problem. So poor contrast, nobody can read it if they don't have amazing eyesight, or if they've got color blindness and effectively end up with poor contrast because of your color choice. Your fonts are difficult to read for people with dyslexia. Got unnecessary motion that is confusing people with vestibular disorders, or you've just got plain old confusing layout and interactions that are a problem for all sorts of people. But I'm not here to talk about bad design. I'm here to talk about good design. So I'm coming in assuming that you've got a really good user interface designer who is focusing on creating a great user experience, and how can we make sure that that great user experience is accessible to everyone. So, good design can enhance accessibility if the styles is translated into substance. So what do I mean by style? Well, simply the appearance, the fashion or trends. On the web, in graphic design, we're talking typography, color schemes, icons, layout, graphical effects, animation, or pretty much everything you control with your CSS. What do I mean by substance? I mean the meaning, I mean the function, the context of the information, the connections between different parts of the interface and the information you're presenting in the interface. And this works out as pretty much everything that is specified in HTML, and possibly a little bit of area attributes. And I will use the word semantics pretty much interchangeably with this concept of the substance of the meaning of the document that you're trying to communicate. Semantics has other meanings, but we'll not get into that today. So when we're talking about accessibility, we're talking all about this substance, the meaning of the content and the function of all the interactive bits. And when we talk about accessibility and the substance and the semantics, we tend to overlook the importance of style and talk about style as being something extra, style as not being enough, that can't just create things with style, you'll have to create it in semantics, all of which is important, but it's kind of missing out a very important connection. So there are many more visual designers out in the world than there are accessibility experts. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. And visual designers are experts in communicating the semantics, communicating the meaning of content in a document, of communicating the function of widgets on a screen, of communicating the context of different pieces of information and the connections between them. So designers who can translate that style, that meaning that is in the visual style, into substance, into semantic HTML, can therefore help ensure that all users get the best experience. Because as some brilliant people before me have pointed out, when you only have some user experience, you have SUX, and that just sucks. So we want all user experience, all users to get the best experience. So I said style is substance in my main title. How can that be when I've just said that style is all visual and substance is all about meaning and function? Well, the markup that you're encoding all that meaning and function is only used by computer programs. Most users will never see your HTML tags, so most users don't know that it's all div soup. And yet, somehow, most users still understand the semantics of a document on the web. And they do it by style. So, your layout, it's communicating the structure of your document. The visual appearance of individual pieces, the shape, borders, shadows, all end up communicating function by implying that this is a button and that is just a label. If it's well designed, there's lots of meaning in the little graphical effects. You've got colors, you've got icons that change and indicate some sort of state that can vary between different instances of the content. And you've got all sorts of other effects like motion that can communicate relationships. So in that visual style, you are representing that semantic substance of the document for the visual users. But of course, style alone is unreliable. If someone puts on an alternative color scheme with high contrast colors, all your meaning implied by colors can go out the window, as it can if they just have color blindness or something. If they're using a plain text layout, then all your layout and graphical effects go out the window. If they're using a screen reader, then all visual cues are dropped. And if they've got keyboard, or if they're using keyboards to control the layout or alternative input, then it doesn't matter that something looks functional unless they can actually control it with the keyboard. And of course, there's everybody else who has those days when you're on a bad connection and the CSS times out and you get plain old default styles. So, styles are important for communicating meaning, but styles are not enough. You need redundancy. You need all that information that is communicated by visual styles to also be expressed in the markup through text content, the actual plain text, through semantic HTML tags, or if those aren't enough, through area attributes to add a little extra information. So it's not enough that your code recreates a visual design. You can have a fabulous design markup, and if you send that to a coding team, whether you're the coding team or whether you've got somebody else in your organization who's coding up your markup, then they can come back with code that perfectly recreates your design but is still meaningless and loses all the meaning that was carefully thought out by the designers creating this code. So we need code that not just recreates visual design, it needs to encode the meaning behind the design choices, which means designers need to learn at least a little bit of the language of HTML and area. I'm not going to get into the larger issue of must designers learn to code their own designs, but you need to be able to communicate the designs in the language that is going to be used in the actual code. Because as we all know, naming things is the most difficult problem in computer science, so might as well use the names that already have an accepted meaning. So that means annotate visual mockups using the HTML area semantics. If you're using a pattern library, make sure that it's got semantic markup. And maybe, and this is kind of controversial, actually enforce the semantic markup by tying all your CSS selectors to only be triggered by semantic markup. And there are lots of great articles out there on this idea, but there are also some performance issues in larger sites and reasons why it might not be used, but it's a great way to enforce quality in a way that even visual users or visual coders will know when they've messed things up. So, at this point, I had a couple of ideas of where this talk would go, and I decided I could not, in 1 hour, teach everything about semantics and how to recognize the different roles that you would want to use for translating the design language of cards and panels and all those different terms in design languages and what they look like visually into semantics that represent the same concepts. So rather than going deep into specific semantic concepts, I figured just a broad overview of the process of the different areas where designers who have invested a lot in creating a great user interface design can help with converting that into great accessible markup. And since I know a lot of people watching this are coming from the accessible side, these are sort of suggestions of where you can delegate, where you can start gathering up the designers on the team, or if you're coming in as a consultant, then making the connection with the people who are working on that organization who are going to be there after you've gone, to make sure that somebody's looking out for these areas of meaning, somebody who understands the content and not just coding it up blindly, but somebody who has gone into careful thought about what content and how it's going to be presented and what the user experience will be, and a couple areas, well, more than a couple areas, where they can come in and do the checklist and make sure that the meaning in the design and the function in the user interface is getting correctly translated into accessible markup. So, quick checklist. Not so quick maybe. I probably won't get into the interactive ones, but basic idea, you've got a style guide, pattern library, mockups, templates. Here are a series of areas where the designer can add extra information, annotate that to make sure that things are getting accessible. So anywhere where there's a complex layout, you need a reading order. For every page template, you need to identify the main element. For every component, you need to identify a role. Repeated components become lists. Icons and images, make sure you've got alt text. Oops, sorry. And as I said, probably won't get into states and relationships, might finish off with semantic HTML text styles. So that's all very well. What does all that mean? Going into detail, what am I talking about? The reading order, that you actually design the reading order. So why would we need to do this? Because screen readers can only read one thing at a time. And many other tools only have limited layout options. So your very complex two-dimensional graphical layout is reduced to a linear reading order, one element at a time. And that same linear order is used by the keyboard tab index order. So what do you use to, or what do you focus on the design side that needs some more work? Start with any template. You've got basic wireframe or whether complete mock-up. You can start thinking about the reading order of your components of that. For within that template, any complex component will need an internal reading order. So I've got a template here where a simple little profile page, there's multiple blocks of content. There's the person's name and contact information and a photo. What's the logical order of that? Maybe the name, then the photo, then the contact information. There's various concepts that are fairly linear, just standard reading order, but there's a image gallery with a grid of content. So maybe the logical reading order is left to right by rows, and work your way that way. But then the more complex question is, how do you then put all those pieces together? Does the profile name and contact information come before or after the table of contents? How do you read all these different components? And actually mark up your graphical design with numbers, saying this comes first. Top of the page, you want to keep it logical so that somebody who's viewing the page and using a screen reader as enhancement can follow along in a logical order. But you have to actually think about complex layouts, especially when you've got really complex, realistic websites. This is CBC News, and a fairly decent layout design, but like most news websites, they put a lot of information into each page. They're trying to keep your attention, so there's all sorts of sidebars, widgets, extra information. There's 3 different columns, some of them have subcolumns, and so if you were creating this design and then handing it off to a coder, there are lots of different ways that that could get turned into the order in code, and some of them would make more sense than others when you're actually arriving on the site. What do you want to see first? So you need to annotate, okay, reading through the top navigation on the banner, the where are we now, the list of articles, feature articles, videos, and so on and so forth until you finally get down to the footer with a site map and copyright information. There are lots of different content there, and it's all got to end up in a logical order that's clear and consistent and has actually been designed thinking about the content and the user experience. All of this is especially important once you add in interactive content. If you're creating interactive content, you need to actually give people information they need before you ask them for input or ask them to make decisions. You have to make sure they have all the information they need for that. If you're got interactive parts of the page that are controlling other parts of the page, you need the logical order for the controls and then what they're controlling. If somebody is submitting forms and then after they've gotten to the submit button, there's an option that changes what that submit button does, that's not terribly useful. You need the options before the submit buttons so that they can adjust before they've taken the action that they can't easily undo. Which all sounds very logical, but even simple forms can have complex issues of what is the proper reading order. So this is a login form, but it has actually 3 different options for how to log in. If you don't already have an account, you've got sign up, and there's 2 different places where you can sign up, a button up top and a link at the bottom. But even then, the main login form, it's got a form on one side, and then it's got a series of buttons to log in with social media accounts on the other side. And if you're reading through in a simple order of login, here's your username, here's your password, here's the login button, you might not even realize that there's these other options on the other side of social media buttons because you got to the login button before you got to the or all these other options. So, and yet, what's the other option? Could you put those first? Could you put those in the middle? Some of these are going to be difficult to do coding up and still respecting the same design. So this is not always going to be a trivial problem. It's sometimes going to be a complex user experience debate of what's the logical reading order, which is why your user experience designer should be working on it rather than just making these decisions ad hoc when you're coding it up. So I'm going to rush through the how you implement reading order very quickly. I've kind of got hows for all my checklist points, but I'm focusing more on the design decisions route, so we'll just... The best thing for reading order, of course, is use the DOM order itself. That's the default reading order that everybody experiences. That in the order, it's in the code, is the order that people experience it. So if you need to fuss things around to implement a given style using float-based layouts, it's better to add extra divs than to change the DOM order. Divs don't usually get a lot of love from accessibility, but it's a lesser of two evils. If you're just doing things for layout, then you want an extra meaningless element as a wrapper rather than messing up the elements that actually do have meaning. If you've got really complex navigation, you can help create those options, multiple threads of reading order with same page navigation links, like a table of contents or skip links, so that people can jump to different options. If these are not enough, there is area flow2, which can change the reading order, and there is area owns, which can create a tree structure, which can be useful, for example, in SVG, because in an SVG diagram, such as this circle packing diagram, you often want to give the impression that one shape is contained inside another shape. But in SVG markup, one shape cannot be contained in another shape. They're not like HTML divs. You can't put a circle inside a circle in an SVG file. All these circles are actually sibling elements with no structure to them. The structure is conveyed entirely by the layout of drawing some circles inside other circles to create this hierarchical organization. In the visual presentation, if you were trying to recreate that hierarchy in an accessible format, you'd have to add in a group of circles and then say the larger circle owns the group of circles that is drawn inside it. I hope that made sense to the people who can't actually see the picture. But it's circles inside circles inside circles to create an org chart. But be careful with area owns and area flow too, because they only help screen readers. They don't help other keyboard users. So your keyboard tab index order is still based on the actual DOM order. So that was checklist number 1. I might get through half the checklist in time. Next, most important and hopefully easiest element on the checklist, every page needs a main element. So if you're creating page templates, identify the main element. Why do we do this? Because screen readers to skip to the content that they're actually interested in. Along with the nav, this is the most important landmark element that allows screen reader users to jump to relevant comment. So, what in the design do we look for when we're trying to define a main element? We're looking for the unique content for this particular page. So, it's usually straightforward of how you're describing this page template. If it's your single blog post template, then it's your article. It's the headline and the feature image and the text and the other images, but it's not the sidebars, which have the same stuff that was on the category page. It's not the footer, which is the same stuff as on every page, or the header, which is the same stuff as on every page. It's the content that's unique to this particular page content. Now, I think that example of an article, people have a fairly easy time identifying the main, but what about that category page? It also has a main element, but it's a little bigger. It's all the articles that are unique to this category. So the main element is not a single article, it's the list of all the articles that somebody has gone to this page to find the list of all, it's all the technology and science articles. And similarly, if somebody goes to a search page, it's the search results. That's the main content for that page. Why are they on that page? They're looking at a list of search results. So the question is always, why is someone at this particular URL, this particular page, and not any other page within the website? So how, this is the easiest how slide I've got in the deck. An HTML main element. Figure out what your main content is and put it inside the main element. If for legacy reasons you can't use a main element, add the area role equals main on a non-interactive element such as a div. And again, all your content inside the main, whether it's defined with a role or with a main element. And one main element, not many main elements. There's been some debate about this, that it doesn't actually break anything if you have multiple main elements, but it breaks communication, breaks clarity, and that's really the only reason we've got the main element there, is to communicate, make it life a little easier, so don't go confusing things with multiple main elements. And I would argue if you've got multiple elements that do not form a unified whole, and yet you think they're all main on one page, maybe you want to look at that design again, because maybe you should divide that into two different pages. So that's item number 2 off the checklist. Except you can go a little further than that. There are actually many landmark elements, and once you've decided what's your main element, you might be wondering what all that other crap is on your web page. So if you can group it into other landmarks, like the banner, your website header, or your website footer, or site navigation, or other navigation. You might have many different regions of navigation, in which case you can give them labels so that somebody flipping through them knows this is the site navigation, this is the category navigation, this is the archives, this is the tag list, whatever different sections of navigation, so that they can jump between one block at a time and not have to scroll through every item in the list. So what other landmarks? You can have a search landmark that's, assuming it's not the main content of your page, but somewhere on your page you have a search. Let somebody jump to that quickly by giving it the role. And then any other content which is common in these complex news site layouts where sidebars that maybe aren't quite related to the main content, but site-wide features or most popular articles or the weather report or the Twitter feed. Group them in an element, give them a role, give it a meaningful name so that people can jump around and find content easily. And once you've checked that off, you're halfway through checklist, I think we're at number 3, which is every component on your website needs a role. Why? Because non-visual users can't see your styles. They can't see the difference between your warnings and your small print or whatever else that might be very visually distinct of different meanings, but it's not shared by everybody. And if it's important enough to give those styles that you're distinguishing content, it's important enough to name that role and make sure everybody can experience that role, to give the context for the information and explain how functional elements actually can be interacted with. So, what needs a role? Anything interactive at all. So, we've got some selections from the fabulous Lonely Planet Style Guide, which is a great example of an incredibly detailed visual style guide. I have not looked at their accessibility layer, but visually it's a very useful style guide, so I've stolen their images of all the different widgets that they felt important to annotate and describe as reusable components, from simple form select drop-downs to complex image carousels. Different types of links, different combinations of links where it's not just a single link, but you have a list of links that ends up being your breadcrumbs explaining what page you're on and which super categories somebody could go to get back out of the complex arrangement of information. All of these elements need some way of communicating why they're there, what is their structure, what is their meaning, what is more than just you get if you read off the text in a row in a broad mechanical voice with no inflection, saying South America, Argentina, Buenos Aires hotels, isn't terribly informative. But if you say this is navigation, you are here, link home, link to South America category page, link to Argentina category page, link to Buenos Aires category page, you were here at Buenos Aires hotels page, then it's a little more useful. So anything interactive needs a role because somebody needs to know how they're interacting it, but also any composite component or molecular organism, if you take the atomic vocabulary for CSS pattern libraries, if a collection of elements has a meaning that you're conveying with a specific visual design, like a dialogue that is different from another dialogue, then you need to make sure it's clearly understood that this is a dialogue, and it's clearly understood that this is the warning dialogue, and this is the something awesome dialogue. And a little color and an icon go a long way, to quote this CodePen pattern library, but if somebody cannot see the color and icon, you need to make sure they're still getting the same message. So Similarly, you can have cards are popular layout, a block of information and metadata with links, but you also have a collection of multiple cards, which creates a different object. These objects are nested together, all of them with links. So pretty much anything you have in your pattern library as a component is going to be something that you want to think about. What is their role? How do you describe it? How do you communicate this graphical information to all users who might not be appreciating your styles as wonderful as they are? Great link to many great pattern libraries and style guides, but we're going to skip on to how do you actually communicate that? Whenever possible, you do it with HTML elements, which have commonly accepted roles like button versus link versus checkbox. If need be, don't have a role that matches, or for some reason you can't use the native role, then that's when you look at the area role attribute. So when I'm talking about every component needs a role, I don't mean every component needs a role attribute. That's the if you can't communicate the role with HTML option. Now that's very nice to say. As I said at the top, this is a whole week-long, month-long, lifelong quest to figure out what is the right HTML element, what is the right area role. But just because it's difficult doesn't mean it's not worth doing, and if you're putting effort in the design, then that's the time to do it when you're thinking about the design, when you're creating the pattern libraries, and not ad hoc when you're coding something out. And one warning, never add a non-interactive role to interactive HTML element, because then people will not know that they can interact with that link if you've just described it as a article or something else. And be very careful adding or changing interactive roles that you actually recreate all the interactions. Area roles do not change any interactive function, they just change how things are described. I think I'm pretty much running out of time. I can go through quick extra credit. Role is only halfway. Most roles also require names. Again, native HTML is the preferred approach when possible, but don't go overboard with labels because they're only actually recognized on certain elements that are defined as having labels in HTML. Otherwise, you've got area attributes, area labeled by or area label name. So I think that's as far on the checklist as I'm getting today. Gonna scroll down. So my final message, good semantics ensure everyone appreciates your good design. And if you would like to look at the rest of these slides, they are online. And I am happy to answer questions and maybe at some point break this down into 3 different talks and go through the rest of it. Okay, Billy and Carl, you have any comments or questions for me?
Really good. Now, can you tweet out the URL to your slide? Because it looked like you didn't get through all of them.
Yeah.
And there's probably some people out there who want to see the rest of the checklist. Yeah, so let's go and see if we have any questions. I didn't think we got any. Let me make sure though. All right. Huh? Nope, I didn't see any. So yeah, go ahead, tweet out the slides there, and thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay. Well,
Bill, who's next? Who do we have?
Coming up at the top of the hour, we have Mr. Bryce Johnson coming to us from Seattle. He's going to demo some of the Xbox accessibility features for us and talk a bit about their efforts over there to make gaming more inclusive for everybody. I've known Bryce for a very, very long time, and we could probably both tell stories that would probably result in both of us being unemployed, but that's that is not an ID24 topic.
Because you've known Bryce a while, yeah.
I have. So Amelia, thank you very much for your time. It was a great talk, and we will definitely make sure we tweet out the rest of your slide deck to everybody. We apologize for the lack of time and not having enough time to show it for you.
Apologize for not scheduling very well. Kept on too many ideas, too much content.
Yeah.
Well, you know, the internet's a big place, and if we could fix it all in an hour, that would be fantastic. But then what will we do for the other 23 hours tonight? So,
All righty. Thanks.
good stuff. All right, thank you very much, and we'll see everyone back with Bryce Johnson at the top of the hour, so in about 14 minutes or so.
All righty. Bye.